Hello, this is Mark Hubbs with Gone Bullet Modes. Today we're going to be talking about how you can alter your Pietta New Model Army to better accept conical bullets and paper cartridges. Stick with us. A while back I did a video comparing several different reproduction New Model Armies, concentrating on the Pietta and the Uberti, and we found that the Pietta is the closest of all the reproductions to the dimensions of an original New Model Army. I think Pietta did a fine job in creating this gun, except for one issue, and that is that the loading plunger from the loading lever extends too far into the loading port, thus blocking the loading of several types of conical ball and also cartridges, including the Johnson & Dow, which is so popular. You'll notice on a Uberti, that's not an issue. The loading plunger does not extend into the port. Thus, it's a lot easier to load cartridges into the Uberti. I did develop one bullet that will work in the New Model Army for Pietta, and that's the Kerr. But a lot of folks want to shoot the Johnson & Dow. So I'm going to show you what I did to convert a friend's revolver recently that worked very well to fix that issue. Now, I'll just have to say right off that the issue is not the plunger itself. The plunger in the Pietta is almost identical to the one in the Uberti. The issue is the location of the retention screw. This is the screw that holds the loading assembly in and also allows it to pivot as it loads. That screw is about 3 millimeters further down, closer to the cylinder as compared to the Uberti and other reproductions, and the original for that matter. That difference causes the plunger to also be about 3 millimeters down into that area. We can't change that screw unless you're a skilled machinist, but I think there's a way that we can do that fairly easily with home tools that will allow you to load cartridges and conicals much easier in the Pietta. So we'll show you how I did that, and hopefully it will help you to do the same should you choose to do so. If you're a machinist or have access to machine tools, this video may not be for you. It may seem rather simplistic. But for others, it may be what you need to give you confidence to try this yourself. Let's take a look at what we'll be changing on the revolver. First, you'll see that yellow line on the plunger. That's about how much we're going to take off of it to allow room for a conical bullet to get under it, and we'll recontour it to try to make it match what an original looked like, at least closer. On the top edge of the loading port, you'll see another yellow line, and then we need to bevel that area to allow the bullet to rotate around and get underneath the loading lever, because it will hang in that area right now. Let's take a look at an original plunger. You can see that it has a rounded cavity instead of a conical shape like you'll find on the Colt revolvers, and 2 indentations on either side. Those 2 divots or indentations on the side of the plunger just allow a little bit more room for the tip of the bullet to pass underneath it. One thing I should mention, before I started this process, I ordered an extra loading plunger to have on hand in case I messed it up too bad. And they're really not that expensive. They run about $10 or less and available from several vendors. But just get the Pietta version because the pins are different sizes between the Uberti and the Pietta. Now, some folks have suggested just to switch out the plunger with one made by Uberti, but it really won't work because they are essentially the same. Now, here's an Uberti above a Pietta plunger. Externally, they're almost identical. Now, if we look at the face of the plungers, you can see that's where the real difference comes in. The Uberti is much more like the original, with the rounded cavity and the large divots on either side. The Pietta is essentially just flat or slightly dished with the divot on either side, and it causes a lot more damage to the bullet when the bullet's pressed into the chamber. The real difference is the location of the screw that retains the loading lever and allows it to pivot, thus pushing the plunger into the chamber. On the Uberti, it's about 10.5 millimeters from the front of the frame, and about 27 millimeters to the back. Now compared to the Pietta, you'll see the Pietta is about 13.5 millimeters from the front of the frame and about 25.5 to the back of the frame. And it's that difference that causes the plunger to be located so much deeper into the loading port. And here we can see a Johnson & Dow bullet sitting in the chamber. The tip of the bullet is too long to get underneath the plunger, and also the edge of the loading port is too sharp and presses against the side of the bullet, thus causing it to be cockeyed in the chamber. Now, based on test fitting the bullet in the chamber and the loading port, I figured I needed to take about 1.5 millimeters off the length of the plunger. And so I'm scribing it here so I can see that line later when I go to file. There's two things to consider when deciding how much to take off. First, remember that there's not much meat there. If you go too deep, you'll interrupt the areas where it attaches to the loading lever itself. And two, if you take too much off, you won't be able to press the bullet down below flush in the chamber mouth when you actually load the bullet. You have to have enough length to be able to do that. I just left the plunger attached to the loading lever I think it made it easier. And I started off using a good file. Took a little bit, then I decided I'd test it on a grinder to see if I could do it a little bit faster. And I found it was harder to control and really didn't like how it was doing. So I went back to the file, and it really didn't take that long to take off that 1.5 millimeters down to the scribe mark that I placed on this plunger earlier. And it was also much easier to dress it up with that file. I filed it down until it just erased the old cavity or indentation on the end of the loading port, and then test fitted it to see if it needed any more, and lo and behold, it did not. I didn't even have to go all the way down to the scribe mark. You want to take as little as possible off the end of the plunger. And here are the results. This is the extra plunger that I bought to have on hand, and it's at 30.19 millimeters. And this is the one I altered. It's only down to 28.64, which makes it about 1.55 millimeters. That's all that I took off. And this is where it may get more difficult unless you have a good drill press and a drill press vise. I'm using a 5/16 inch drill bit here just to kiss the face of that plunger. You have to be very certain that you have it centered. I'm not drilling a hole. I'm simply making an indentation in the end of the plunger to try to replicate that dished area on the original. Next, I use this grinder bit that has a rounded tip on it to try to round out that indentation I made previously with the drill bit. A round grinder bit for a drill may do the same thing for you, but I had this on hand and it worked great on my drill press. I just left it in the vise and then kissed it again with that grinder bit. And here are the results. I'm very pleased. Came out better than I had expected. The next step was to cut the indentations on either side of the loading plunger, and for this I used a bullet-shaped grinding wheel on my Dremel motor tool. Now, as we all know, Dremels are a great tool, and one thing they will allow you to do is to mess up 10 times as fast as you can by hand, but fortunately I was able to cut the two sides without any trouble. What I didn't show here is buffing the end of this on an 8-inch buffing wheel, which really helped clean it up quite a bit also. And here's the results after I blued it, comparing the one I just altered to the Uberti version that I had on hand. Okay, so now that we have the plunger squared away, let's address our other issue. Notice with the bullet in the chamber, when I try to rotate it around underneath the loading lever, it'll snag on the side of the frame, right in that area there. And it will cock the bullet out, almost push it out of the chamber when I do that. So we have to remove metal along the side of the frame there, just basically bevel it to allow free movement of the bullet as it rotates. The next step is to bevel the frame on the loading port, as we mentioned before. And I started that process with the needle file. It will work. However, being the impatient type that I am, I switched to my Dremel. And I'm using a small sanding drum here, the smallest size that they offer. And I think this is less aggressive than some of the stone grinding wheels that they have with these tools. Now I'm just taking a tiny bit off, just the sharp edge along that loading port. And I'll do this 2 or 3 times in the process, stopping and reassembling and checking to see how close I am. Here's the completed bevel. Now you can see I can take the bullet and I can put it into a chamber, and then it will rotate all the way around inside the loading port and under the lever, and without touching the side of the frame. Now it's just a matter of cleaning up that area. You can use various grades of emery cloth on a dowel rod to get in there and polish it. And that works very well. It's just a little bit time consuming. If you feel comfortable with a Dremel tool, then you can use one of their felt polishing wheels with some polishing compound, and it will really slick it up. That area now has a much better finish than the gun itself, and it'll be ready for bluing after I finish it all up. Before you re-blue any of these cleaned up areas, you need to degrease them. I use acetone. There's several other things that you can use. There's lots of good cold bluing solutions out there. I've used Oxbow Blue, Perma Blue. I like Vans better. It works quickly, but it has more of a blue color as opposed to Oxbow Blue, which seems more black to me. A Q-tip works great to apply this bluing solution. Just saturate it and rub it, and you'll see the metal start to turn almost immediately. I usually let it dry and or wipe it off, let it dry, and then I'll immediately start another coat. And I did that probably 4 or 5 times for the plunger here and the side of the frame, and it seems to have a good deep finish in it now. So here's the finished product. The bluing's done its job and looks very good. I may have to reapply someday, but right now it seems deep in blue. And here's the gun cleaned up, reassembled, and you really can't tell where the work has been done. I'm ready to go to the range. This is another Pietta which I've done the same procedure to. And as you can see, a Johnson & Dow cartridge can be loaded without any trouble. And here we see putting one into the chamber, rotating the cylinder underneath the loading lever, and driving it home. Well, that's how I have adapted a few Pietta New Model Armies to take conical cartridges. I'm sure there's other methods too. In fact, this may inspire you to develop a method that may be even simpler. And of course, if you got machine tools or you're a gunsmith, this should be an absolute piece of cake. I'm glad you watched. I hope it was helpful for you, and I hope you'll subscribe to my channel. Thanks for watching.